We were going to show the contract, I think. So I have Deps Crypto, Aleo Casino Table, main.leo. It's open in the main.leo tab if that came up.
Yes, yes. I'm looking at it.
Okay. So this is what I ultimately ended up with from that diagram I shared. I'm sharing in the Jitsi. Um, that we would use seats occupied, seats ready, dealer, player, random seed hash, and random seed. And they would not all have values initially. Um, for example, we pick a random seed from the person starting the table and the players they want to invite. They can have the possibility of using this address and conceptualizing that as a burn address. So what I meant by that was if you send to that address, it's not a player, and hopefully no one can get that address's private key. It's not the best practice to use a burn address, but I can't find out how to give 8 players and make it optional for you to choose all 8. There's no null
Mhm.
address, you know. So this is the value of an address, which is 0. Random seed hash, it's a Poseidon 8 hash function run through the U64 you provide. So you'll see a record with the input for the U64, so you can recall that in the front end. But
Okay.
other players will see the Poseidon value, the field value of that number.
Any reason why you have used Poseidon hash rather than SHA 256, SHA 256 or SHA 512?
Um,
Um,
I don't are there Shay hashing algorithms on Leo language?
yes, yes,
It does have
there
Shay.
are because yes,
So
yes, there are because I have used SHA in my code. I
I
wanted to just check why I.
yeah, I'm used to SHA, but like Poseidon seems more exotic to me. That's the reason I picked it, to be honest. I haven't heard of
Okay.
Poseidon hash, so I'm assuming it's a newer development. Shade 256 is 256 bits of, I guess, entropy, based on that being 256 bits generated from whatever input you provide it, that are always going to be generated with the same input. Poseidon 8, I just referred to that from the dice example from Aleo. I
Okay.
think the dice example used the Poseidon 8 hash to come to a random number, and that's what the random number implementation of this contract relied upon. Um, I don't know the technicalities about how Poseidon 8 is implemented, to be honest. And I know Shade 256 is a lot more industry standard for outside of Aleo. Um, I know Shade 512 is even more secure if you're trying to brute force it. But honestly, it was just I didn't put much determination on what the hash would be because ultimately the U64 value is revealed publicly, and then it does an assertion that the hash of that U64 value that they reveal at a later date is the same as the hash that they gave initially. And that assertion says, okay, this U64 is the random number they want to use. They've uh, said they're going to use a random. They commit to it first, and then after everyone commits, they choose at their convenience to reveal what they committed to, and then I'll show you down here. Um, we do this add wrapped operation, and we take each player's random seed and we add them, and get a final random seed that we make a new hash from, and a new um, random seed. I think we provide that random seed as well. So it's like each player gets a U64 value. They tell you what the hash of the value is, and then they reveal the value, and then the value is wrapped, added to other values that were provided, and comes up with a number that they couldn't guess independently.
Mhm. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't think the hash is really going to determine they're not going to brute force the hash unless they have a rainbow table. I think it would be more likely they'd have a rainbow table for Shade 256 than it would that they have a rainbow table for Poseidon 8. Do you know what a
Yes.
rainbow table is?
Yes, yes, it's a mixture of hash plus salt. So yes, I know salt
Okay.
plus.
I think that would be the concern here is that they could take the hash and look it up in a database and say, oh, their number was XYZ, and then choose their number accordingly.
No,
Um,
they can.
so the workflow on this is that first you invite players. The arguments to this, you have 1 through 7, and yourself, which makes 8 players. And then seats is computed. If your player address is not the burn address, it counts you +1 towards a seat. And it determines that based on how many players were sent invitations. A casino table record with the initial value is from main is an invitation. This is what I'm considering an invitation. The first record is the dealer, and that's the caller of the main transition. And initially, none of the seats are occupied and none of the seats are ready. Those are handled in other transition functions. But the dealer is set because that's the person who called the main transition, and the players are set based on the arguments P through 7, 1 through 7. The next part would be sitting at the table. That's like acknowledging an invitation. You sit down. So I just kind of tried to tie it to a real life event, if a table were an actual physical thing. So you have your table record you consumed that you received as an invitation. Oh, sure. I'm sorry, Harsh. Go ahead.
Um, so I see that you have written like 8 records as far as I can see uh, in the output of the main function of the main transition. So you have written 8 records, right?
That's
So
correct. Yeah.
if yes, so if there are less than 8 players, it would still return 8 records. Like on the burn address, there would be created multiple records of the same thing. If I'm correct, the burn
Yeah.
address would have multiple records, right?
It's possible.
Yeah,
Like, it's a risk that the burn address, someone could get its private key and they would have casino table records that were from a game.
uh, okay, no, I'm not telling from a security
Okay.
point, but I'm just telling you, is there a better way to do this? Like, I'm telling you from the perspective of like building the thing. So, is there a better
Optimizing it.
way to
Yeah.
do this?
I guess if we made it generate 1 record to the caller and 1 record to the dealer, um, the idea was that like I think the only way to get rid of the possibility of having 8 records returned with a single call is to have multiple calls with a single record and calling that multiple times. Um, so you would have it return 1 record to the caller
Or
and 1
maybe
record to the recipient,
um,
and the caller would use that record with multiple recipients.
okay. Or the players can join in and get their own record. So like the first game is created,
Right.
and
If
then
we
the
had
play.
mappings, it could be a public record that they just pull off of a mapping, and then once a transition function uses that record so many times, they can't be used again because the mapping gets updated to a limit, an upper limit. So
Yes.
that's one feasible way. We could have it all pull from a mapping, but load and store are not. That would be a great refactor that we can do in the future and aim for that improvement when we have load and store ready.
Um,
Some of my direction has been based on what's like capable now. So I tried to do, you know, at the expense of having to write 8 outputs and potentially waste half of them if I'm having a 4-player game. Um, I did that, but in the future, you're right. It would be more sensible, and it would make more sense if we could, for instance, set the record into a public mapping, and then people could see that that record that's set only has 4 people occupied out of 8 total, and then if you have 8 people looking at that mapping, you could potentially have 8 people occupying those seats.
Correct.
It would be more pull based rather than push based, where you send them a table to begin with.
Correct. Correct. Uh,
I just don't think we can do it now because the mappings, I haven't gotten a straight answer on how to access them. And so I even
yes,
have,
yes, that's the same problem I have faced. Like
yeah,
limitations of the API value with regards to the mapping.
right. My goal right now is just kind of to push through the limitations, and then if they improve, to go back and change things to reduce the complexity. Um, I think that's possible. I don't know if testnet 3, the only problem I could foresee is that like it wouldn't be possible to update a program. I know right now you can deploy a program one time, so if you can't update one, and I do this one way and expect to change it, I'll have to change the program ID to include like a version or something. And that way, I guess I would have to change the front end each version that is deployed.
Uh, yes. Okay. We can move ahead with the code.
Okay. Um, so I think this is finalized main. So I say if it's not a burn address, the count of tables with the address increases by one. So it is tracking a mapping. How many games you've ever played. When you sit, I don't do transition functions, or I don't do finalize functions. Um, so I use them, but I'm not really relying on them heavily because they're kind of an alpha. For sit, you consume the one that you received as an invitation. It gives a public record, which means hopefully other people who received the first record can look for the public record with the same dealer. I'm not sure how that works yet. I'll have to see how the transactions are broadcasted. And then if I can listen to that to see a public record for another player or not from people who have the same initiating transaction in their unspent transactions. Um, so it gets seats occupied, seats ready, everything from the initial table. But the random seed hash, when they sit, they provide a random seed, a number, and it uses the Poseidon hash, and they commit to a number but don't reveal what that number is. And so ready is the same thing. They take their commitment, the hash, and they spend that, and then they reveal the number again. And the number has to match. It asserts that the random seed hash equals the Poseidon hash of the number they just provided, so that it hadn't changed. And so here I generate one. I just use the contract address for the second casino table record. That's the oracle, potentially. And then this is the dealer. And I said in the signature that the first one was private and the second two were private. The second one was private and the third one was public. So it's giving me some syntax highlighting here that this isn't. I tried doing this. I don't know if that would fix it, but it seems to just contribute to the syntax error, and it compiles fine. So there's some issue with having mixed scope on return signatures. So yeah, the end goal of ready is that you relay your original hash, but with the value that produced it. And I have fill empty seat. This is if it was a burn address. It generates a ready response for that burn address. So my idea is that the dealer would take all of the casino tables that received these ones right here. These are going to the dealer when they ready up. And he would get 7 of those and his own, I guess. And he would send, we would do these assertions. We would say the owner is the dealer that called, and the player is the person who called for P0, and the dealer is the person who called for P0. It's a lot, but it's basically saying is the owner and the dealer the same person? And do the seats equal the same number on all of the records? And then we start with a 0 for the random seed. We do the wrapped addition that I showed you earlier and come up with a new random seed. And then we check again the burn address and say how many people have been occupied and marked ready, so that you end up with a final record that says an up-to-date number of people who are playing and a record for each person who's playing. I don't know if this can be used in practice. Right now, what I'm doing on the view front end is trying to make it possible to create the first main transition function. So let me stop sharing my screen. Let me share a tab of the app, and you can see essentially what I'm working with right now with the front end. You don't have to know all of the underpinnings of it, but I wanted to collect accounts that I made with LeoJS, which is an entropy library. And so I've managed to generate 8 accounts. The first one is going to be the main account that sends the transaction. The second one could be representative of a player, but it's not going to be another person that you know. It would be ultimately that you would click somewhere over here and select player 1, then select player 2 and select player 3, and the UI would update as if you were connected to those players' wallets. So it's like a proof of concept. It's like proving that you can use records to make a game like Duroc, which is pretty advanced, considering what Leo gives you out of the box. But it's not by any means trustless. It's ultimately you are the same accounts, but the app can choose whether or not that you see the records or not based on the current view you take on. I have this burn icon that copies the burn address into the field. In this create table record, I didn't deploy the contracts yet, but when I do, I'm hoping that this path is the correct endpoint and that I can structure the argument. So that would be the next step. But you can see I've templated out the slingshot command that this would generate. Execute Aleo casino table main with a random U64 integer I generated, and the addresses that were generated whenever the storage for the view controller loaded for the view model. So yeah, I don't know. Are you following? Do you have questions about the contracts on Leo, or questions about it's kind of going to have to require looking at the transactions in kind of an accounting perspective, where it's like some of them count and some of them don't based on newer transactions and those being expired. But you have to look at them collectively to figure out what the game state actually is. You can't look at any one record to know the total game state.
Mm-hmm. And players won't share their individual record with each other, so I guess that's pretty secure on that collectively.
Yeah, when it's deployed to testnet 3, and that players can be that you could share an address book with someone and they could say my address is XYZ and other players could do the same, then eventually it'll let you have the records not all kept on one browser client. Right now the records are all tied to accounts generated by this client. Like if I go to the home page and then I go back here, they stayed the same. That was part of the storage I set up at the front end. But if I refresh, you get all new values.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a prototype, somewhat similar to the ones that we've seen in some of the ambassador, some of the Aleo Dev Workshop calls, I mean. And so the goal would be that it goes from this input form eventually to a picture of a table with icons for the people who have records that say they're ready, and maybe an interface for cards where we have the suit and the rank and the color, and it would kind of show you like what are the potential cards that the other players have that are visible to the public, and what are the cards in your hand that are only visible to you. But that we would be able to say, I want to look at player 2, and it would switch to this being the primary account, and you would see player 2's hand. Or you would say, I want to see player 3, and it would switch to this account, and you would see player 3's hand. So it's going to take a lot of complex work. It's not near being complete, and that would be part of the challenge in setting something up like this. I can show you the logic we have here too, where it's executing a transaction. Is right here on casino table invitation.view. This is a component, and a component is used in a page, and this particular one shows the form for the main transition. And so it has the account that I got from a network storage provider that I created and defined properties for all 7 accounts, all 8 accounts. And it has arguments, which are essentially the addresses of those accounts that show up in the form. And then it has the account's private key. It needs that to actually execute a transaction on behalf of the account. It has the program ID, the function name, those addresses that were the inputs, and then additional fee I left 0. But then my hope is this Axios library is something that sends a REST request, and the post method sends a post HTTP method, and the endpoint is this is supposed to be the Slingshot local node, and the transaction is this object here, which has serialized parameters that it turns into arguments for executing a execute command, similar to using the Slingshot execute CLI. And then I just want to log that and see if it's successful. So part of doing that, I have this Slingshot I added to the package JSON of the project. I don't know if you know how package JSON works, but I added some run commands, and you can run Slingshot npm run Slingshot, and it calls Leo build on the get submodules, the dependencies crypto aleo bitwise stack and dependencies crypto aleo casino table, the 2 Leo programs. And after it builds the aleo operation opcode, the bytecode for that, not the bytecode, but the opcode, the aleo instruction set, it deploys a local development node. It doesn't deploy it. So to do that, there's a couple steps you have to take that we would do in the terminal. So one of them would be Slingshot pour, and this would give you credits. So if I look in the deps folders of the program JSON files, they have addresses and private keys. You would pour this, and you would pour like 100, just 100 credits to each address. So aleo casino table, that has a program JSON which has a different address. And the reason for this is it uses some credits to deploy programs. And so with the current version of Slingshot I have checked out, the program won't deploy if the address it's configured for doesn't have any credits. So I think it should finish up here. I don't know why it's hanging. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Josh, was there anything that we should stop and discuss?
No, I'm just letting you go over it because you know it better than I do.
Okay. Harsh, stop us if you have anything to discuss, or, I mean, while this is deploying, it'll take about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to deploy. And then the part I showed you, these console errors, just mean that the Slingshot node isn't accepting the request. So all that needs to be done is to format Axios, the library that sends REST requests, post request over HTTP, similar to what it would expect. There's curl examples, but we would be basically getting a REST request to mimic a command from the CLI that works. Okay, so that first pour worked. And I forgot to specify how much. Okay. So yeah, this can get really flashy. We can actually add a table. We can have a picture of 5 cards, 6 cards, however many cards you have in your hand, and we can have more of a visual interface than this text-based kind of ciphertext interface we have right now. It just needs to have a listener so that when a new block height is reached, it looks for program records for our program and for the players that we have in memory, their public keys, their addresses. Well, this is well, it's still pouring. I wanted to get into deploying. The other thing is you can see Slingshot here, it's generating blocks, so it's running.
Yes. Just a quick question I wanted to ask. When you are using Slingshot, you are allowed to import a single file, right? A single program. Besides the main program, you can import another program.
It might work with one. I've had trouble with more than one, but you might be able to get it to work with one. I haven't tested that approach. You can use cross program calls. You can use the program ID.leo slash the transition function name. Slash the record name dot record, and that represents a function. So I can kind of show you that. In the source for this, you can do something like, you can't do it with functions, but with transition functions, I could do if the name of the record in this function was Oracle, I could do aleo.leo if there was an import called aleo.leo slash oracle.record. And then inside of the function, every time I said Oracle, it would refer to this function's record. And I could do aleo oracle.leo slash in the name of a transition function and call that transition function.
Okay. So what you are saying is it might work with one import.
It might. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Okay. As I can see in your casino table example, you haven't used any import. So I was just wondering, will it work with one import or it won't work with?
I can get it to compile with imports. I have an example that compiles with I think 5 imports on the other branch of this repository. There's one with imports and there's one without imports, but it doesn't deploy. That was the problem I was running into. I was getting 500 errors deploying.
Yes. Same problem I had. So I asked, so will it deploy with a single import or?
I didn't get the error until like the second import, so it's possible. That's why I'm saying it's possible. I didn't get the error until the second import, I think, and so it might be possible with one import. And that would probably, reduce the number of contracts you have to write by half if you could have each contract have a single import.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay, so the accounts have credits now. The next command would be slingshot node deploy --path deps crypto aleo bitwise stack /build. The build folder has the aleo opcode instructions. And this slingshot deploy requires aleo code. It can't deploy leo code. And it's not node deploy, it's just deploy. So the path might be a little off. Oh, okay, so I'm in Aleo bitwise stacks. So let me do... Okay. Got to give it the full relative path. So yeah, deploying, I don't know, have you managed to deploy anything to Slingshot?
I wasn't able to get anything deployed because my code, I tested it on Leo
Like
I
Leo
tested
run?
it on the Leo SDK. Yes, I tested it on Leo, and then when I tried with Slingshot, it gave me the error. It was very vague error, so I wasn't able to figure it out. So I
Right.
asked on the TG group.
Right. It's a little difficult because the errors it gives, it just says a status code 500 and it could be anything. I
Yes.
did change the code a little bit, and one of my PRs is unmerged on that Slingshot repo that will tell you error 500 and then the status response code that generated that. Not the response code, but the descriptive snark VM error. So that can help a little bit, but a lot of times it's the same thing and you don't know what it means. And that's what I was running into. But I found out if I took these steps, if I compiled programs without imports and I only used one record, and I might have broken some of the ease of understanding the program that way, but that it was possible. So these might not be ideal examples geared towards what they want the end product to look like when Leo becomes mature. You know, there was one example where I even implemented a string, but to use the string, you had to set each character's value on a property of the record.
Okay.
I treated each value like a U8. 1 through 255 would represent one of the half of that. 128 would represent the maximum ASCII character value you could reach in decimal.
UTF-8. Okay, UTF-8.
Yeah, UTF-8. What is it? It's UTF-8. The Unicode UTF-8 is relevant to legacy ASCII support. So there's an example floating around there, I think, that does ASCII. I think in one of my shared public repos. So this takes a long time. If you look at Slingshot, the node I'm running, it's doing a universal setup, then it's building main, it's certifying main, and now it's going to move on to the other transition functions just for bitwise stack. So
Okay, I will have to. I have like 8 minutes. Then
Okay.
I have to go.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot. We haven't really developed, but I think we've gotten a basis in understanding, and other people can kind of watch this and understand similar concepts to the overall project. It's an advanced series, meaning there's kind of a lot of moving parts. I think you caught on a lot very quickly on what I'm doing here, so that's good. Let me know if you wanted to add anything, and we can stop recording, and I'll upload this to IPFS at some point, if that's okay with you.
Sure, sure. I think the code itself is like very clear and readable. I don't think that it would be better to have it modular. Like you have both the versions, so I wouldn't say that. But yes, a lot of problems seem to arise from the current implementation of the LEO, like the features, limitations.
Right,
So I guess
right.
a lot of things are still needed, like uh, a proper working wallet, even with the Snark VM running on the browser. I
Yeah,
tried
yeah.
to,
So I've
I
heard
tried
I've
to
heard
for
I've heard the wallet with Snark VM running in the browser is coming, and it's been in progress for 2 weeks with Demox Labs, that they might make a Leo wallet adapter update, and I don't know if that would mean they would announce a beta version of their wallet that would be more public. Right now, you have to get on a wait list to even install it. But yeah, that is coming, and then I would hope it would move from software wallets, hot wallets, to hardware wallets eventually. But I think that's even further down the road.
So I tried actually compiling the Snark VM for the browser build for the browser Wasm. The problem I faced was that a lot of imports were local file imports. So what it does is local file imports doesn't work in the browser. So I switch all the imports to the browser-based imports. I switched that, but then the problem was there are certain issues I'm not able to remember now, but I wasn't able to build the Wasm Snark-VM Wasm for the browser.
Okay.
Right?
I think there's a JS interface that depends on that as a library from Entropy 1729, that organization in Argentina. Let me get you a link to that in the chat for Jitsi.
Yes, no. The LU JS SDK. I actually read the code. The LU JS SDK.
Yeah, so I don't know. I haven't tried building the Wasm cargo crate as far as getting a Wasm for that. I guess.
No. So this library, how it works is that the LU developers have built a Wasm with constraint functionality like creating wallet,
Right. Accounts, private keys.
certain few functionalities, not the actual ZK code and etc. So this is built on top of that limited Wasm file that LU has released.
Right. So you're saying you tried to use Aleo Wasm directly from Aleo's Git repo, and it didn't have the imports correct? That the Wasm wasn't loading on your side?
No. So they don't have the Wasm for the. They don't have Wasm. They have a Wasm but with limited functionality. So what I tried to do is compile the Snark VM into Wasm. So
Oh, I see.
For Wasm. So I tried to compile the Snark VM for Wasm. That's where I ran into some issues.
Yeah, that would be a difficult target. I guess when you do Wasm, you have to do Wasm bind gen on the signatures that you want to expose, and you have to, I think, use like opaque references to the Rust structures that you call methods on, but you don't expose the entire data structure to JavaScript.
Also, the memory limitations of RAM on the browser.
Yes.
The,
So I was hearing from Evan that he thought he could get it down to like a 15 megabytes from the hundreds of megabytes that it uses currently. I don't know how he's doing that, but that's what they were discussing with their progress to get Wasm to work in the browser. To get, I'm sorry, not Wasm to work, but to get Snark VM to work in the browser. So it seems like they have a grant proposal for that, and it might be like future grant work based on developing an implementation of Snark VM and Wasm.
I think
it's cool that you investigated that, though.
I think that's very necessary to have Snark VM in the Wasm.
I think it's even further to go a step further to have Snark VM working without libstandard, and I don't know if that's possible because of how heavily we currently rely on libstandard, the C++ standard library. Not the C++, but the C standard library. A lot of embedded hardware doesn't have nearly enough power to run Snark VM, nor memory to handle some of these ZK snarks, and it's like, do we do the account side in an embedded device and somehow manage to run the Snark VM on the desktop with permission from, delegation to the desktop, but not revealing to the desktop your private key? I want to ultimately have a way to generate your private key and not ever have it connect to the internet, because I feel that's a vulnerability to have your private key on a device connects to the internet, even if it's encrypted by a password.
I agree. I totally agree with that. That's why the hardware wallet
Yeah, it seems like it's a way off, but
okay. I guess I will have to leave now.
Okay.
I really enjoyed the session, and
all right.
I look forward to it.
Okay, it was impromptu, but yeah, we'll also the repository is private right now. I'll prove a few more things work, and then I'll give you an invitation to the repository and other people who collaborate on it And if you feel like working on it, you can get it to run. It's just a simple npm command like npx vite will serve up the application, and it has git submodule in it. Update recursive will get the Leo contracts, which are public repos. And if you feel like in your spare time doing any kind of contribution, like in a asynchronous manner, then you could do a pull request and you would get full credit for that contribution. And then I might have a discussion back and forth with you to see if we could make it generic enough that if it has something that's done one way, we would agree on a common way of doing things that everyone would be able to adopt.
Yes, that makes sense. As there are not a lot of building blocks on Alio right now, so that makes sense to build the building blocks for other developers to ease into.
Yeah, I
That
think
makes sense.
too it could be a front end boilerplate. You know, you start with Duroc, you tear out Duroc, and then you put your app in, and you have a front end that has the dependencies necessary to do an Alio dApp. So
Yes,
that's
makes perfect sense.
another way to look
Okay,
at it.
guys,
Okay, it was
have a
nice.
great
It was nice talking to you, Harsh.
Right. So yeah.
See ya.
okay.